Hello, I am so excited to be sitting here today with Matt Solomon, who is a consultant with FranChoice and also an expert franchise consultant with years of experience helping entrepreneurs navigate the world of franchise ownership. So today I'm just going to be asking you, Matt, some questions about your world in franchising. And, this could be helpful for anyone who's interested in learning more about the whole franchising process and just learning more from a consultant's perspective. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. Thank you very much. I've never been called an expert in anything, and I guess this is it. So
Well, there you
I
go.
appreciate it.
There you
I
go.
appreciate
My
that.
pleasure. My pleasure to do so. So how about you just start by telling me a little bit more about your background and what has inspired you to become a consultant, a franchise consultant?
Yeah, for sure. I started my career in advertising and found myself on, obviously on the advertising side of the business, helping clients, helping big clients run advertising campaigns. And this was back in 2000. And I got pink slipped twice from ad agencies and had to find another job because you lose clients at advertising agencies. And what happened was I found myself working for Panda Restaurant Group, and they own Panda Express Chinese food, which is obviously a huge privately owned company. And they were planning to franchise those locations. And at the time, I opened their 500th in San Diego and was really enjoying working on that side of the business. And they never franchised. They didn't feel like they needed to. They opened tons of new restaurants. Now I think they're international. I think they have over 2,500 here in the United States. And I stayed in that business. So I moved from Panda Restaurant Group over to Red Robin. I worked for a number of other franchised organizations, including Jack in the Box. I worked for Orkin for a period of time. And so I really got to know marketing for franchise businesses and helping franchisees who may be struggling, who may not be, doing things the correct way, the way that the process states, maybe even in their franchise disclosure document and what they're supposed to do. And so that was really appealing to me. I liked helping people. And I loved working with franchisees because they were independent owners and they all had their own strengths and weaknesses. And I felt like I could really help them. And so, like I said, I worked for a number of franchise organizations before becoming a franchise owner myself and then becoming a franchise consultant. So I've mostly worked in franchising my entire career and in one facet or another, but mostly in marketing and leading marketing teams at franchise organizations. So that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
That's great. Yeah, that would give you a really good, I guess, kind of understanding of, the franchise world and also just, dealing with people. We had kind of already talked about that. So great. So when you are working with clients, what is your process for understanding, their goals, skills, and even financial needs before you go recommending any franchise options to them?
Yeah, so I work for FranChoice, and we have a really excellent process that, that we follow, similar to how you would follow a process at a franchise if you were an owner. We follow a very strict and stringent process that we know works for our candidates. And that means, taking them through that process to match them with the specific franchise businesses that are an excellent fit for them, not only from a personality perspective, but a culture ad perspective. So if someone's really interested in restaurants, that may be all they know, right? That may be all they know about franchising. And our job is to really help them navigate the pitfalls of what that looks like along the way. But, the big part is the consultation. And usually that takes an hour and a half. What I do is I do an intro call. I want to make sure that my candidates want to work with me and I want to work with them. It has to be a good fit that way. And the good news is we get to choose who we work with. So oftentimes it may not be a good fit and I'll recommend maybe another consultant. But for the most part, we do the intro call. And in the intro call, we make a decision together, an agreement that, hey, we'd like to do this together. And then we schedule, after they send us the intake forms, we have a little bit of information about them. We'll schedule an hour and a half consult. And that's where they do the heavy lifting. I ask all the questions and I listen and take notes. And for someone who likes to talk a lot, that can be hard. But you really have to force yourself to listen to your candidates and really dig deep into what their motivations are. And that's not to sell them. the goal is to understand their motivations. So from their perspective, ask a lot of questions that may require them to dig a little deeper, so that you can you get to the bottom of what it is they really want. Because you get people from all walks of life. You get people who are out of work, and desperately seeking a job. You get people who are still in corporate America and interested in leaving. And then you get people who are investors who are just interested in the franchise model. And so when you start to dig on their motivations, they start to come out differently than they state them oftentimes. So give you an example. I worked with a gentleman who had plenty of money to buy franchises. He actually was retired at 34. He'd sold one of his businesses for a lot of money, and he had lots of money in his bank account.
Amazing.
And he said his motivation was to work in health and wellness, and he wanted kind of to follow the franchise model and open a number of locations in Southern California. Well, during our call, I would often hear a baby crying in the background, and he would have to pause the call to help he had a full-time nanny, but help the nanny with the baby, and he was working from home. And as I dug a little deeper, I found out that his motivations were not about, a different investment model. His motivations were to keep busy and, quite frankly, get out of the house. He didn't want to be at home all day. He wanted to be doing something. Yeah. And so he didn't say that to me, but in my consultation, that kind of came out. And so it completely changed our strategy and our model, because now we're not looking at necessarily investments. Right. We're looking at things that he can do that are going to be fun for him, and that's a rarity in most businesses, that you can meet people that just come to you and say one thing, but mean another. And then you're able to tell them, sounds like you just want to do something that's going to be fun, right? That's something that you enjoy doing, something that gets you out of the house. And that's really the reality for most people. They don't know what they don't know about franchising. And the consultation is intended to bring those things to the forefront, so that you can match them with really great franchise brands.
Yeah. No, it's got to be a very thorough process, especially that first conversation. And as long as you go into it with an open mind and ready to answer a lot of questions, right? That's very important. People really do discover different things that they didn't even know about themselves. It's a pretty neat discovery process overall, I would say. So being very thorough is very important. This isn't like a 5-minute how you doing sort of thing. It's way more than that.
Yeah, it is way more. You're right. And it's interesting because it's your second conversation typically with these folks. And so they're disclosing, personal things with you. And so the ability to have that intro call and establish trust, both directions, right? I'm going to be transparent and direct with you. My only ask is that you're honest with me. And you can kind of tell, really out of the gate, the people who are going to do that, who are willing to do that, and those who are not. And those who don't, typically either they're not honest about the questions they answer during the consult. And it's very hard to match people if they're not very transparent with you. And so establishing that first intro call, which I kind of gloss over, but it's critically important, because that transparency and trust needs to be established. And literally I'll ask that question. Do you feel comfortable working with me? I feel comfortable working with you. Let's do this together. You're going to make all the decisions. I'm going to make all the decisions on the process. And that's all I do, right? I run the process that FranChoice has outlined and establish trust. And quite frankly, it's interesting. I mean, I've talked to hundreds of people, and a lot of them are still, I'm still very friendly with. Whether I placed them or I didn't place them, they're still my friends. And that's really cool. That's a really cool part. I love this work. And I think that's part of the reason is you meet so many cool people, and if you can help them, great. But if you don't, that's okay too.
Ending and having a good relationship no matter what. That would definitely be a cool part of it. Now, how do you evaluate and vet franchises before you recommend them to a client? What criteria is most important to you?
Yeah, that's the hard part. And so because you get people from all walks of life, the criteria changes. But there are some specific criteria that we're lucky enough not to have to focus on as franchise consultants, because we have such a great portfolio of brands, and the people who work to bring those brands on for franchise do a really great job of vetting.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the great things about being with franchise in particular. But, we still take a look at, and when I say culture add, I mean, a candidate needs to be okay with a certain type of leadership style at a brand. And they have to be candidates also have to be comfortable with the investment. And so those two things are something I'm going to look at first and foremost. What's the investment criteria? What are the necessary assets that a candidate needs to have in order to qualify? That's out of the gate. This is kind of the cornerstone of what you need to look at. But number two is who are the leaders at this brand, and will this person be able to fall in line or add to the culture at the brand? And that usually starts at the top with the CEO or leadership, C-level executives, but it also falls into, the category of understanding the other franchisees that are in the system and knowing what they're like. Because one of the values of buying a franchise that people often overlook, because they think that now they're a solo entrepreneur, is the value of having all of the other franchisees that have done this before you and who have had success as your, you can call them, you can talk to them, you can ask them questions. There's people, like I said, that come from different walks of life. So they have the skill sets in, for example, finance. If you're not comfortable with finance, the system's going to find you a franchise who's great at the financial aspects of running the business. And you get to talk, and they're going to answer your questions, and they're going to help guide you. So you have all these mentors and coaches that you didn't have prior to agreeing to sign with a franchise, which you do not have if you go out and start your own business. And typically you don't have that if you buy a existing privately owned business. So that's something that I think is really important. So those two are big. Obviously the financial ones, nuts and stakes, but knowing the franchise, knowing the culture, knowing the leadership, knowing the product is the way that we do the best job of matching our clients with their, obviously with brands. Now, if someone comes to you and says, all I want to do is window washing brands, and that can be difficult, right? Because they don't know what they don't know, and talking down off that type of industry, if they aren't going to be a good match, can be difficult. But that's our job, right? That's really our job, is to help people see things in a different way, perhaps, or find opportunities they didn't know existed to begin with.
Yeah, that's what the process is for, right? So now, what would be an example of a challenging client placement, and then how did you work through that to find that specific client a good franchise fit?
That's so right now that's happening frequently, and part of the reason is because the job market is really hard. I don't want to say it's bad, but it's really different and hard. And so a decade ago, people would have a resume, they'd apply to a job that fit their skill set, the job description matched what they do, and they typically get an interview. No, whether or not they got the job is a different story, but that is not the way it's working today, as you know. People apply to 500 different organizations, never get a call back. If they do get a call back, they're oftentimes ghosted. So I talk to a lot of people that are like between the ages of 40 and 55. And it's one of two types of person who's been laid off, who's looking for a job, and doesn't realize that franchising is an option. And I know we're going to talk more about this later, but franchising is an option for most people. It really is. It's not as expensive as people think. And so people who are out of work, who are draining their savings account to try and find another job, or worse than that, they've drained their savings account. Now they're looking down the barrel at their 401k and using that to fund their lifestyle. Those are the, for me, I call them the hardest candidates, because there's pressure for them to find something that can start them out of the gate with an opportunity to start making some money. And the reason why it's hard for me is because those people are near and dear to my heart. I call them my niche people, because I always feel like those are the people I really want to help. Those are the people who I will go to any length to try and help them out because I know how it feels. I've been there before. A lot of them have families, and and I don't want to say they're yet desperate, but they're getting close. And I know that desperation can lead to bad decision making. And so stepping in at that time with a candidate who may be a little bit desperate, slowing them down, telling them that like, we're going to do the best we can to find a good fit while they're draining away at their savings. That's the hardest type of candidate for me. Partly because I really want to help them. I think if I get an investor who knows a lot about business and simply wants to invest in a franchise, can that be difficult in a different way? Yes. Yeah. But they're gonna make most of the decisions. When someone is in that phase of saying like, I'm gonna lose everything and I really need your help, that hits home for me. And that's the time when like I said, I'll do a lot of things for that type of candidate that I will never need to do for a different type of candidate because of their situation. So it's situational, but that's a difficult situation for both the candidate and the consultant, because you do really want to help these people. You're never trying to sell anybody anything in this job. And I say that with full transparency. I never want, and I tell people that if you ever feel like I'm selling you something, then the relationship's gone, it's gone a direction neither one of us want to go. I'm here to help you. And I've had candidates like that buy privately owned businesses. I've had them buy franchise businesses that weren't in our franchise portfolio. And that's cool. I'm just glad we were able to open their eyes to seeing a different path. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we're in it for, right? Helping.
Yeah.
So how do you tailor your approach for clients with varying financial situations or business backgrounds?
That's that can be difficult too. We've had to turn people away that just simply didn't qualify, and that's hard. You try and help them the best that you can. But if you're in a really dire place financially, franchising can be difficult because you may need to get a small business loan or use your retirement to fund the franchise, which I think is awesome, especially right now, the way the 401ks are up and down. But I think that's the number one piece I look at. Of course, I'm going to look at your financials. And it's interesting because when you do that at the beginning of the process, it's not something you have to really go back to frequently. You've established the criteria, and then you start looking at brands that fit that criteria. And that's really, all that we do. But I think one of the other things that can be interesting is even people who have a lot of money and who want to make a big commitment to a brand and buy multiple units or territories, they're still, they want to know what the outcomes could look like for them. Yeah. And what I find with most candidates is that if they come from a business background, any business background, quite frankly, but I think sales and marketing is a big one. If they come from that background, their chances of having success, I think, this is just my opinion, I don't know this for fact, go way up, because a lot of these brands are looking for people to be kind of the mayor of their town, be out in the public, be social, sell themselves and whatever it is their product they're selling. And I hope that partly answers your question. So I think that's really the way I look at it. It's that first thing that I view as the financials. If they're structured in a way that they want a brick and mortar, and that's, maybe we'll get to that, but I turn people away frequently from brick and mortar if they're new to franchising. Yeah. Because I think that's a totally different financial investment that people think franchising is about brick and mortar, and it's not always about brick and mortar. Right. And those are expensive. You've got to have a lease. You got to have a build out. It's not something you're going to buy today and hit the ground running tomorrow, right? With a lot of brands nowadays, there's a chance for you to do that. But with brick and mortar, it can be more difficult. People with lots of money that want to have multiple locations and make a big investment in an up and coming brand, that brick and mortar option is available. But there are lots of other options available to people who don't have that kind of financial background and backing and structure. Yeah, for sure. It is definitely a very important conversation to have, because even although someone may be excited and motivated and have a really great background and skill set, if the funds aren't there, like, you don't want to send someone into that has no working capital and won't be able to
support themselves. I mean, luckily there is, yes, the loans that they can look into and stuff like that. But yeah, and so yeah, it can be, maybe a little bit of a trickier conversation, but it's definitely a conversation that has to be had. So,
Absolutely.
it sounds like you've got a great kind of mindset and process for going about that conversation and helping kind of guide them through and even helping them learn a little bit more about their own financial situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm
That's
not a
so important.
financial planner. My wife does all the finances.
Yeah.
And I always tell people if it was up to me, we'd be living on in a tent on the beach. And so I think being very transparent
Yep.
about what I see and then my experience with other candidates, I'm very direct about it. Like, look, you're not going to qualify for the type of brand you're looking for. There are other options if you're interested, but you're not going to open a high-end spa that's going to cost you $2 million and then a build out. So, very direct about those things because you've got to clean the slate and really let people know what they're looking at, and so yeah, that's that part's, it's weird to have that conversation, especially intro call where I'm letting people know that like, I'm going to need to see your financials, just the basics out of the gate. You just met me and here I am asking for your numbers. But that's only, and I tell them this too, that's only so I can qualify you and make sure that we're matching you with the right types of brands. Because if we have a discussion and all you've talked about is health and wellness, well, and you don't qualify for potentially a brick and mortar or a gym or something like that, then we've got to have that conversation early.
Yeah. So, there's no point in dragging it out and wasting any time. Everyone's time is valuable and you want to just make sure that you're doing your job. And I'm sure that, in the long run, people usually do appreciate that and understand. So
I think so.
So that's good. Now, how about a story or I guess not like a story, but like, is there like a client that you have in mind that you really did help, choose the right business for themselves and they have found success? Like how does that, how did that make you feel kind of in that moment, maybe helping that particular client find, their dream, make it come true and, fulfill that dream of getting into business for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, there's been many, but I think the one, there's certain people who you really connect with.
Yep.
It just happens. It happens in everyday life, but I mean, there's certain people that you connect with. They either remind you of someone or, they're so like you're talking to them and they need to be an entrepreneur and they don't see it in themselves. And so it's almost your job to say like, open your eyes, like you're going to be great at this. But there's no guarantees in franchising. And so you don't say that. I mean, when the thing about franchising and owning your own business is it's up to you to make sure it goes. Like that's the one thing standing in your way is you. And I think people have a hard time betting on themselves.
Absolutely.
The fear comes up and people go, am I going to be able to do this? And it's one of the, are you going to be able to do it? Yeah. Do you want to do it? Yes. Then let's go. Then it's going to be great for you. So when I'm confident about matching someone and they're drawn to an industry, this can happen frequently where you'll provide them with, some brands and there may be one specific industry that oh, wow, I didn't know that existed. And I'm really interested in that. Then you kind of can hone in on what it is they're looking for. And so I did have a candidate who had some health issues. He actually had cancer and he was working through getting some chemo done. He had a lot going on in his life. He was the breadwinner. He'd been out of work for quite a long time. And finding them something where they're able to relate and correlate their current situation or experience with the brand and have passion behind it. And see them really say out loud, this is an opportunity for me to help others. And it may be an age thing. Like when you get into your 40s and 50s at your career, you stop, you're less worried about money and you're more interested in being passionate or helping other people. And that's a big thing for me. And so one candidate in particular found, their passion and didn't know the industry existed and, really dove into it. And they were at that desperation phase. I'm ill. I don't have a job. I'm the breadwinner. I need your help, and that's when I dig deep. And so it's a success story. There's many success stories, but that one in particular stands out to me because, helping someone along that way and really positioning them for success because they're passionate about the industry, based on their relevant or current experiences, is where the magic happens.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when they're in a very, tough point in life too, to help someone find and give a little bit of inspiration and motivation. That would definitely feel good, and just knowing that you help that person in more ways than one.
Yeah.
So great. Now you've kind of brought up a couple of misconceptions along the way. So to just, ask that question, what are some of the most misconceptions that clients have about franchising, and how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean that's there's a lot of misconceptions about franchising. Yeah. Some of them are really, a lot of consultants will talk about semi-absentee franchising, which is obviously a buzzword that we all know about as franchise consultants, but also in franchise sales. I wouldn't say that's a misconception necessarily, but I don't use that frequently. I've used that before with certain brands that actually are, they're semi-passive opportunities. But the thing about semi-passive is it's very hard to be semi-passive when you own your own business. So if you have a full-time job and you want to be semi-passive, you need to hire someone to run that brand for you. You can't do it yourself because you're going to be all in, and I think that that's what it really takes to be a great franchisee. So that one's a tough one. Are there opportunities like that? Yes. Yep. But what's the structure look like for a potential franchisee? And what is he or she going to need to have to be able to be semi-absentee out of the gate? And that's typically someone who can run it for you. So that's kind of a misconception. All brands are not semi-absentee. Right. Most are not, as a matter of fact. And the other one that's really big is you've got to be wealthy to buy a franchise. I think before you get into franchising, you see these, franchisees, and they've got 5 units and they're driving a Mercedes, and they seemingly have money. But I always remind people, well, when they started, they didn't have money, and this opportunity to scale a business and to get to 5 units or to get to 7 territories is what made them their wealth. Yeah. Right? They didn't come into the game. Most people don't in franchising with a bunch of money to invest. They come in the same ways that my candidates come in, looking for work or want to get out of the corporate rat race. Yep. Where they're adding a ton of value, but it's not getting them anything. And that's a misconception that you got to be rich to buy a franchise. You don't. As a matter of fact, it's not nearly as expensive as people think at all. So that's the second one. And then the third one is fun because, this happens all the time. Everybody thinks like Chick-fil-A and 7-Eleven. Those are my options. Brick and mortar concepts, right? Or they the story about McDonald's, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. The franchise world is exciting in due part because there's so many different options and industries. I mean, I think I've counted over 25 industries, all different that you could run a franchise in. And of course, home services is a big one, big category. But so are business franchises, like people that come straight out of a corporate job and move into a role where they understand the concept because it's business related, and they can use their existing network to ramp the business up and scale it. And so people don't realize those exist at all, right? And I get candidates who want to open their own consulting firm or are thinking about a franchise, and it's like, well, why don't you do both? You can do both. And there's great opportunity to hit the ground running with those types of brands. So I think that's the final kind of misconception is that, it's restaurants or bust, or it's convenience stores, or, I've heard of this one, this one brand. And most people who come to me, that's how they are. They've done a little bit of research. They've gone on Biz Buy Sell, which I won't say that again, but Biz Buy Sell is where business go to die, we say. We people are only know what they've researched. And that's And quite frankly, the more research a candidate has done into brands, the harder it is to
Yep,
get them matched with
to
the
get them
right
back,
people. Now
which
they've
is
got this
why,
idea of what it's like. If
yeah,
people come to
it's
you with a clean
important.
slate,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's important
right,
to just go work with your person, listen to what they have to say, learn from the source itself, right?
right,
And
absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
realize you're not really doing yourself any justice by going out on your own. The path
No,
I've gone so far, right?
no, I mean that's the
Yeah,
worst thing you can do. I mean, if I had one piece of advice for people interested in franchising, you don't do it alone because there's so
no,
many options for help. There's lots of
yep,
franchise consultants, depending on the types you want to work with. I'm there, there's no reason to go get yourself into a situation that's not good for you because you've done the work on yourself. It's like doing dental work. It's like doing your own dental work, right? No
yeah.
one's going to do
Let's
that.
not do that. Let's
Don't
not.
go don't go looking for a franchise by yourself.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Let's, yeah, make that the title of this here. Don't
Right.
do it alone.
Don't do it
Um,
yourself.
well, I mean, Matt, I very much appreciate you joining me today and sharing your insights. I know that this will be very valuable information for anyone who is interested in learning more about franchising with someone, not on their own. And of course, someone looking to get into business ownership. So it's nice to hear kind of firsthand, from a franchise consultant, from your point of view, kind of how that works and what that looks like. So
Well,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me and have a great rest of the week. And I appreciate spending time with you. Thank you.
Yes, great.
Okay.
All right, we've got Matt Solomon here from FranChoice, and I have a question for you. So, what has your experience been like working with Schoolie Mitchell, and what is it about Schoolie Mitchell that makes it attractive to some of your clients?
Yeah, my experience has been very, very good. And when I say that, I talk specifically about the process from
Mhm.
establishing territory checks. For example, that's the first step, kind of the first outreach, and making sure there's territory available. And from that moment on, Schooling Mitchell does a really good job of their own process. There's a lot of brands who don't have one.
Right.
There's a lot of brands who, they don't have automated emails outlining what it is that we now need to do to help your candidate along, which Schooling Mitchell does really, really well.
Mhm.
I think almost to a point where they're the ones talking about frick and frack, meaning they're the ones that are telling
Mhm.
you it's really important that we establish a relationship and have a conversation before we even talk to your candidate. And there's a lot of brands who skip that entirely because it
Yeah.
takes time, right? And not every candidate buys a franchise. And so making sure that that's a critical key component to the process is something Schooling Mitchell does better than a lot of brands. And so that to me is important because it alleviates frustrations. They're making it a priority, so it forces you to make it a priority. And I think them having a process on their end for introducing your candidates to the brand is really well thought out. And so I'll say it again and again. When you can get an email that lays out what the next steps are after every call or every conversation, the way they want the process to be done is really great. And it's been useful and helpful. And that's one of the reasons why I like Schooling Mitchell.
Awesome. Well, that
Yeah.
is that is all good to know.
Yeah. So
Got
the other thing
Yep.
about Schooling Mitchell that I love is that I get a lot of candidates who come straight from corporate. And
Yep.
one of the things that they can relate to and Schooling Mitchell's product, right? Like they understand it, they get it, they understand how it's useful. And in times like today, where just being a consultant, a business consultant, is a really hard sell,
Mhm.
saving people money is not a hard sell. And so
Yeah.
that's what people are
No.
looking for, and that's never going to go out of style, right? And that's
Yeah.
always going to be a key component to the brand and really important to businesses is saving them money. It doesn't matter if they're doing great or not doing great. Businesses are looking for that value add, and Schooling Mitchell delivers on that. And that's something that all of my candidates who come from the business world can understand and appreciate.
Mm. Yeah. Good. Well, that is all great, like feedback and good to know. That's why we like to ask, just so that if there's anything that we need to work on, like let's do it then. So thank you
Awesome.
so much for taking some time to answer that today.
Thank you.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.